Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the director of the museum, and this week we're going to talk about one of our World War I veterans from Genesee County, and one that has a lasting impact actually here in Genesee County. This week we're going to talk about Glenn S. Loomis, who was actually the first Genesee County soldier killed during World War I, and in his honor, the local American Legion post was actually named after him. So we're going to go through his life and his service during World War I, and how his impact is still felt through the American Legion today. So Glenn Shotwell Loomis was born on February 10th, 1895 in Sherborne, New York, which is in Chenango County. When he was 8 years old, the family moved to East Pembroke, and then about 5 or 6 years later, they moved here to Batavia and lived at 21 Lincoln Avenue. Now Glenn had a younger brother who was born when they were living in Genesee County named Frederick, and after graduating from Batavia High School, Glenn actually traveled out to Cleveland, Ohio, where he worked as a railroad mail clerk. And he did that for a very short time before eventually coming back here to Batavia, where he continued on in that position on the local railroads, but then decided to change career path. Glenn decided he also wanted to get into some news reporting and actually worked as a reporter for the Batavia Sunday Times. When the United States entered the war in 1917, Glenn was drafted in, but on his draft card it says his occupation was as a student, though he wasn't in college at the time, but he did actually at the time graduate from a course at the Rochester Business Institute, which would explain why he would be called a student. Now, Glenn was drafted into the Marine Corps in July 1917, so just a couple months after the United States declared war, and he was sent to Port Royal, South Carolina, also known as Parris Island, for his basic training. And he would be training there for the rest of the calendar year. By December, he was on a boat for France and reached the European continent by the beginning of 1918. Now, once he reached France, he did not see battle for quite some time, as most of the American forces were held back for further training and organization before they were sent into the front lines along with their British and French allies. But this all changed in the late spring of 1918 when the German forces launched massive offensive missions along the Allied lines and were pushing back the forces, especially in some of the French sectors, and the American forces were now needed to help stem the tide and hopefully push back the German forces. One of these particular sectors was along the French line at Chateau Thierry, which was falling back significantly. The American 2nd Division, which included Loomis's unit, the 5th Marines, were the group that was sent in to fill the gap at Chateau Thierry. And they were put in position at an area called Belleau Wood, which would be the site of a very long and bloody battle. On June 6, 1918, Loomis's unit was at the vanguard of the attack that would launch what would become the Battle of Belleau Wood, which would last nearly a month. And the unit was able to eventually accomplish their objectives, but at the cost of many lives, as they were attacking very heavily defended positions. And though the initial attack was successful, it had left a gap in the line, and the Americans' flank was heavily exposed to German forces, and this is right where Loomis's company was located, right on the edge of the line. And it is during a German counterattack that Loomis would eventually lose his life. So the Germans attacked that same evening, roughly around midnight. So Loomis's date of death is sometimes listed as June 6th, but more often as June 7th. And they attacked the exposed flank, and Loomis was posted as a listening post, essentially, looking and listening for enemy movements. And he called out the attack and was one of the first to repel the attack and then chase after and continue the advance against the German positions. And it was in this advance that he was actually stabbed with a bayonet through the back and into the chest and was killed instantly. He was eventually, his body was recovered some hours later by his comrades and brought back to the lines. Now, Loomis was actually the first Batavian killed during World War I, and was actually one of 4 Batavians killed during the Battle of Belleau Wood. He would be buried in France for some time before his body was returned for a proper funeral here in Batavia in 1921, and he was eventually buried in Elmwood Cemetery. Now, Loomis's sacrifice was noted, and a chapter of local veterans was actually named after him directly after World War I. But when the American Legion was created a few months later, the Batavia post here was named the Glenn Loomis post, post number 332. Now I'm going to read some accounts of Loomis's death from his superior officers as well as those who were in his company. Lieutenant Bernard Gissel, who was Loomis's platoon commander, wrote, "I had sent him out as a listening post to warn us of the approach of the enemy. His last deed was to give us the warning, and then as a real Marine, he went one better and was the first to start after the Boche, which is what the Germans were sometimes called. I do not doubt he saved many a life in my platoon. He drove off the enemy, and a few minutes later, we brought back his body. He had been killed instantly." In the official information listed by the military, one of his members of his same company, James Cooley, said, "Loomis was struck with a bayonet at Chateau Thierry just as he was getting out of a small trench they were occupying to repulse a counterattack at midnight." And another report by Sergeant F.A. Series reads, "He cried 'Bosh!' and came tumbling down the hill and fell against a tree. He was stabbed in the back through the right side, bayonet going through his chest." Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact video series. I learned a little bit more about one of our veterans of World War I and one who sadly did not come back, Glenn Loomis. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like or subscribe to the channel, and be sure to check out all the rest of the videos on our channel, as there's nearly 150 of them up now, so there's plenty of material to go through. But as always, the best way to learn more about Glenn Loomis and other topics of Genesee County history is to stop by the museum for yourself and check it out. As you can see all the artifacts and stories up close and personal, and we'll be happy to share even more information than what's in these short videos.